Welcome, I'm Sherry Damaris, and I'm so excited today to have Dr. T. Colin Campbell with us. He's a professor emeritus of nutritional biochemistry at Cornell University. Coming this August, he's been professionally involved in the field of science for 65 years. He's a longtime experimental researcher on diet and health and has participated in national and international food and health policy development, and has extensively lectured on and off campuses in at least 60 countries. He's best known for his book, The China Study, co-authored by his son Tom, who's a physician and researcher at the University of Rochester Medical Center, that has sold at least 3 million copies at least 50 foreign countries. So I'm so honored to have you, Colin. You inspire us all with your hard work and research, and I know that you want to come on today to talk about your latest research on diet and nutrition.
Well, thank you for having me. I still remember the first time I heard you give a presentation down on the cruise.
Oh.
It was very inspiring. You knew what you were talking about, and you've been doing it ever since. Very nice.
Thank you. Tell us, what is the main point that you wish to make for these 6 decades of your experimental research? I know the China Study has been read by millions of people around the world. It still inspires our teachings in macrobiotics. But tell us a little bit more about what you're working on now and what you're aiming for in terms of that research.
Well, first off, maybe I should just comment on the origin of the China Study, the book itself. It's based in some considerable extent on a project we did in China, of course, but even more so on the work we did in the laboratory. And what I was trying to do was to tell, how I once come up from a farm, being trained in animal agriculture, if you will, how I ran into this information that challenged the idea that we should consume so much animal protein. That's really what it was. Got myself in some trouble with that because challenging that idea is not the best thing in the world to do if you want to make a career out of yourself. But in any case, I learned that the consuming animal protein was a problem. It was a serious problem, along with some other things, the processed foods, etc. And so I wanted to tell that in the China Study, which came out in 2005, reprinted again in 2016, I guess it was. Some more books along the way, but the more I got involved in this over the years, particularly from the policy point of view, I was deeply involved in national international policy for a period during the 80s and 90s. I saw to a great extent why it is that so much of the public tend not to know about this. It's kind of a sad story. There's a lot of politics, a lot of economics, a lot of social sort of consciousness, if you will, about these issues. And so here I am. I'm really just interested in talking about the main thing, and that is let's eat the right food. We can gain immense health. And in the process now, in the recent years, we also can gain a lot of health for our planet as well. So it's a big deal. Just choose to eat the right food.
And I love the message I often use in cooking class about epigenetics, that we often think that we're born with a genetic defect of cancer or heart disease or whatever, and eating plant-based foods over a period of time can actually change the whole gene makeup. And that is groundbreaking for people to realize that, just because you're born with a parent that may have a terminal illness, that doesn't mean that you're going to be terminal as well.
Yeah, we all are born with, maybe I can say it this way, some good genes and some bad genes, a lot more good genes than bad genes. But in any case, the genes is the basis for the formation of disease and for the formation of good health. Genes are the starting point, it's a template. And so we tended to assume, at least in cancer research, which is my specialty, we tend to assume that cancer arises or does not arise as a function of whether or not we have the genes to cause the cancer. So what my research showed early on was this idea, no, that's not the whole story. The genes are controlled, whether they get expressed. And so what controls them is nutrition of all things. nutrition has this powerful influence of being able to keep under control the bad genes, if you will, and allow expression of the good ones. So that's the idea. So therefore, the question becomes, well, what kind of nutrition is that? That keeps things in order like that. It's truly amazing. And the effect is so broad, so profound. So that's where I am today. I get excited about this idea of consuming whole plant foods.
Yeah, and you, in your book, Whole Foods, you emphasize the need for whole foods and not so many supplements, because supplements, since they're made in a factory and they have a limitation to them, whereas a whole food has many dynamics, you said, going on at once, that really, we can't really replicate, God's work, so to speak.
Yeah, I think the key idea there, at least for me, was this notion and this evidence that came forth to show that food has all kinds of nutrients, obviously. We know a lot of them by name, but we have, hundreds of thousands more than that act like nutrients. And what happens when we take one of these nutrients out of the food and consume it all by itself, like in a supplement, for example, it oftentimes doesn't have the same property it does when it's in the food. So taking out one thing at a time, in fact, it may have the opposite effect, which is pretty startling. So what this brought me to was this notion that, hey, we ought not to be focused on so much of our time on talking about this nutrient or that nutrient, or how much of this, how much of that. It's really the whole food. It's nature at work. Mm-hmm. And what I saw inside of the cell, and this is where, being a biochemist, that's where I felt like it works. We've got a few trillion cells, of course, in our bodies, doing all kinds of things. And every one of those cells, we can't see them with the naked eye, obviously, but they're a universe unto themselves. And the amount of reactions going on inside the cell and between the cells and so forth, there's just infinite. And then at the same time, when we eat the right food, all those reactions work together like a symphony. It's a beautiful concept. And then all of a sudden I think, at least it came into view for me, the concept of a symphony. Mm-hmm. That's the way symphony is made, that we have individual notes and individual instruments and so forth, but the symphony is a marvelous sort of reaction to all of that put together. Or the great Renaissance art is the other thing I'd like to mention. And so it is with our lives. Mm-hmm. Our lives are really, we ought to concentrate on the wholeness of our lives. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's so many parts, all the way from the mental to the psychological to the physical, if you will. Mm-hmm. When all this working together, and it will work together if we do the right thing, mm-hmm. if we eat the right food. Macrobiotic diets gave a really head start to that whole idea, as you know, with Michio Kushi back in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. So there you have it. I mean, it's a fairly simple concept, but as far as the biochemistry is concerned, the biology, it's just infinitely complex. And the problem we have in our society, whether we're in the professions or not, the problem we try to focus on one thing at a time, out of context. And as I said before, doing it that way, it really doesn't work. That's not nutrition. Mm-hmm. That's better known as pharmacology. So nutrition to me is, the whole food and food from the plant kingdom. We got caught up decades, centuries ago, and believed that maybe we ought to be eating animals too to get the good protein. But in reality, that turns out not to be the case. We can get the protein from plants, and we get better protein. We get all the protein we need from plants. And so it really begs the question, why do we eat all these animals all the time? Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been caught up in that for quite a long time, because what we found early in our research was that animal protein, and this is what the experimental animals I was using at the time, the animal protein turned on cancer. Very, very potent effect. And when we elevated the consumption of animal protein, the cancer grew well. When we decreased it or replaced it with plant protein, it did not. That was a striking thing. Turned cancer on and off experimentally. I could hardly believe that. And coming from the farm, all of a sudden beginning to question what I had grown up to believe. It was a tough road. But the only way I could, navigate that terrain, if you will, was just to remember what my father used to say to me when I was on the farm. Tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Never forget that. And he only had a couple years formal education. He was a farmer, but I took it seriously. So,
That's beautiful. And we've had Neil Barnard on often talking about, the medical profession and how they're not really schooled in nutrition as well. He's making great strides to change that. But oftentimes when people do get sick and they go to a doctor and the doctor maybe looks at their ear problem but doesn't recognize that the ear is related to the whole body, like we have seen in acupuncture. So the importance of, getting these people educated in nutrition and learning more about a plant-based diet. You've done tremendous work between Forks Over Knives and your documentaries showing, prominent athletes getting stronger and stronger from just a plant-based diet and destroying the myth that we need protein and we need animal food.
yeah, that myth has been around for, just you just said, for a long time. Formally, in 1839, actually, that chemical was isolated from meat being fed to dogs at the time, and it was recognized that the dogs had to have that food or they would die. But then they finally isolated this really interesting chemical, and they wanted to give it a name. And so the word that came to mind was from the old Greek word meaning proteos, P-R-O-T-E-I-O-S. It means of prime importance. So proteos, that Greek derivative was then used to frame the new English word protein. That's where it came from, meaning of prime importance. And of course, the assumption was made then it's only present in animal food. Later it was found to be present in plant food too, but then that was kind of downgraded by those in the field because plant protein was said to be not as good as animal protein. You had to combine things. You had to do this and that and stuff, which is nonsense. It turns out that the protein of plant is much better. It's associated with health, and the protein of animal food is not. It promotes disease.
And now we had Will Tuttle on talking about, slaughtering the animals and growing them in horrific conditions with lots of chemicals and antibiotics. Neil Barnard talks about, the high dosage of antibiotics that they put in cows before they produce milk, directly affects our whole hormonal system. So I think even, we've reached the limit in terms of, health of the planet and health of our bodies in this food choice for eating factory farm animals.
Yeah, that's a very, really big issue. And again, coming from the farm, that was a challenge for me to recognize that and go with it. But in reality, the development of the livestock industry in this country and over the world has been ongoing for a long time. And it's largely driven by almost unconscious belief that we have to be able to eat that kind of food because to get that protein. That's what it came down to. When in fact that's wrong. That's just simply wrong. And so now with the livestock industry the way it is, it has a very commanding presence, as we all know. Forests are cut down, oceans become polluted, and groundwater that we drink is polluted as well, and climate change, overheating we are dealing now with some really big problems that altogether, the best possible solution, let's eat the right food.
Right.
That would really have a major, major, major effect across the land, across the world.
Yes.
If we learned how to do that.
Yes. We're going to take a commercial break and we'll come back to you, Colin, and hear about maybe some of your new research that you're doing.
Today's show is sponsored by BCAT, aligning people with their purpose. The Brand and Culture Alignment Toolkit was designed to bring teams into alignment around their collective purpose and inspire each member to become the best version of themselves in support of the people and communities they serve. Our science-based solution consists of instruments that measure and map and collective perception of your organization's North Star and practical methods that help each member embrace and align with it.
Welcome back. I'm Sherry Damaris, and I'm delighted to have Dr. T. Colin Campbell with me. We discussed a little bit about his work leading up to the China study. And Colin, I just want to know what roadblocks you're running against. Why aren't the public jumping on board with your messages? They're backed so well with your research from Cornell. And I know you shared a little bit about your challenges on the cruise in terms of, big pharma and big companies coming in to sort of run the universities and screen out the grant money for further research in fields such as yours. What are you running up against?
Well, first off, on that point, by the way, I'd like to point this out. All of my research through the years was funded by public taxpayer money that came from the National Institutes of Health, American Cancer Society, and so forth. So I just want to point that out because when I talk now, I feel like I have a duty to talk to the public at large, to taxpayers. In any case, that being said, there is a lot of confusion, as you just mentioned, and that has a rippling effect on all sorts of areas of our society. The reason for the confusion, I think there's two reasons. One is we tend to worship protein, so that causes problems, and we don't like to de-worship that kind of thing. But the other is that we tend to focus on the parts of the whole. In other words, the whole, that's the way I describe nutrition. Everything working together in this marvelous way, doing all kinds of good things when it's the right kind of nutrition. But what happens, and this is an idea that started back in 1800s, actually late 1700s. There were two theories of cancer formation, for example, and treatment. One was called the local theory of disease, where you come in, you just cut it out and everything is resolved. Or the other one was called constitutional nature of disease. And the constitutional nature of disease, that's the concept where everything's working together, the whole body, all that stuff. Well, as the 1800s progressed onwards, we stuck with the animal protein because that was one problem. But the other problem was because of the Industrial Revolution, we picked out one thing at a time to focus on. Because if we could get intellectual property protection for that substance or that idea, and something like that, then it was commercializable. It lent itself to business. And so our entire corporate structure through the centuries, almost 2 centuries now, that has founded on the idea of being able to sell specific items, doing specific things, treating specific things. And all of that, it turns out, to be out of context. I'm talking about being out of the context of Mother Nature. I mean, I think Mother Nature is the best thing we've ever had, by far. We are her. And so in that particular case, when we try to take little bits and pieces out and work with them that way, just because they make a lot of money, we can make drugs out of them, maybe. That's the drug industry, basically. And especially if we can find ways to target the drug for some particular event in the body to cure some particular disease. That is confusing, because as long as we have, infinite numbers of parts, I can find parts from now until the next million years. I'll talk about this, I'll talk about that, probably something else. And the confusion that arises from that is incredible. So no wonder that I just feel sorry for the public in a way, because the public is faced with, well, do I do this or I hear this, I hear that? No wonder, for crying out loud. And so what we need to do, and here I put on my hat working in sort of the policy arena for quite a number of years. If we would just tell the truth to the public, what really does work across the board, and don't get too caught up in talking about the details and specifics. That's kind of interesting, maybe. And occasionally might something work that way, but really, let's not forget the whole story.
It's interesting you bring that up, Colin, because recently I interviewed a very well-known doctor who had studied in over 12 disciplines, psychiatry, internal medicine, and he came to the conclusion after years of research that nobody lined up in terms of agreeing to the correct treatment for, say, anorexia. So psychiatry came from it one angle, internal medicine came from it in another angle, surgery came from another angle. So even amongst the medical field, there's not a huge, strong agreement because they're looking at bits and pieces and not the whole person.
Yeah, there's I don't know, I hesitate to name specific names, but I think in this case I will because it's a good purpose. There's an organization in California I've known for about 30 years or more called True North. It's founded in part on, well, major part on doing a fast, or only a fast for a while, and then getting into this whole food plant-based thing. I was there recently, and it's the totality. They work on this concept of holism, all the way from let's decide what kind of food we eat, how much sleep, how much water. Let's get our physical movements the right order, mental state, meditation, whatever. That's to me is total health, and I think it's referring to what you just said. We got these different sort of specialties in medicine. And they tend to operate, unfortunately, in almost an independent way. When in reality, the best deal for all is somehow for us to have an awareness of all those very important specialties. Yes, that's fine. They do good things, tell us some information. But somehow we've got to keep in context, too, that the whole really matters. And that's where nutrition comes into play. Nutrition is the concept. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That was what Aristotle said a long time ago.
And you're so humble in not, you've done so much work in terms of educating the public. You have the plant-based degree program that people can take online with all your books, your lectures. Your son is doing fabulous work for the world in terms of encouraging people to try a plant-based diet. And his wife is doing great cooking classes to complement that. You've really taken on the world with your message, which is so honorable to all of us.
It was naive on my part. I mean, I'm just a simple farm boy, let's face it. And so when I got involved in this kind of thing, I just relied on, there's a couple of people I'd really like to mention. One's my dad, who I was close to. I was the oldest son, and so he didn't have an education like I got, and the other is my wife. We've been married now 59 years, and we had 5 kids, and so she just took over that domain, and works in the kitchen. She fed me the foods I was talking about, and it's so fantastic. And our daughter and we have sons, and our daughter-in-law Kim Campbell, too. She's had a cooking class, and this kind of stuff you're doing too, Sherry. I should tell you the macrobiotic diet movement at the time started by Michio Kushi, more or less, and I got to know Michio, and I invited him up to give a lecture to my class here in Abilene. It was very nice. We compared some notes just quite a number of years ago, and so on the campus teaching, and later his stuff was enshrined in the Smithsonian, so he asked me to come and give the lecture during that ceremony to honor his work. So that the macrobiotic diet movement, it was there. It is still there, as you know. There's some difference in the way we interpret things, but not a lot, really. The main point is let's eat plants and eat them whole.
And we love your books because when I do counseling with people, I'll recommend that they pick up the China Study as their first book, and continue on from there and read your works. I know we've hosted you at the Kushi Institute in Amsterdam and had you speak on the cruise all the time. So we really are complementing each other. I think with macrobiotics, sometimes they have these, food remedies that, they teach vegans to, and vegans teach us more about, the health of the animals and how important that is. So I think we complement each other, which is great. And I hope moving forward, we form a great partnership to teach the world.
Right.
How
It
can,
is the future.
yeah, how can people reach you to enroll in a program or to hear about all the exciting projects your son's doing or to purchase a book? How can people reach you?
Well, we have the Center for Nutrition Studies. The URL is nutritionstudies.org. That's plural, nutritionstudies.org. Actually, my daughter is now the president of that. She did her doctorate in education, was in the Peace Corps, and so it brings that dimension to the whole thing. So we're now actually reaching out to, she's organized it, so our organization is reaching out with a micro grant program throughout the world. And so the whole idea, and also I should say our program now has been just about done now, fully translated into Spanish.
Oh my gosh.
So we'll bring in the Spanish world for starters, and because this is an international issue, what is true for us is the same as it is in Nairobi, Kenya, or Saudi Arabia, wherever you want to name it. And it's all the same message. It's and one of the neat things about this idea too is that the science is the same. We're basically all the same around the world, but yet at the same time we each have our ethnic customs and cuisines. We can actually maintain those special ethnic cuisines on the same formula. The only difference is in those different parts of the world, it's the flavors and spices that you share, so well, that can characterize the uniqueness of those different ethnic cuisines, which is kind of nice.
Yes, and it's so great that you're doing this work, Colin. Thank you so much, and we hope to be in touch with you in the future and continue with your wonderful work and inspiration for so many people.
It's been a pleasure, so thank you. Good luck in your own future.
Thank you. And everyone, remember to eat as healthy as you can and grow a garden. And join us next time for another episode of Macro Magic.